Okay, let's unpack this. If I asked you to close your eyes and picture the global economy, the real gritty engine that keeps civilization running, where does your brain go? I'm guessing you're picturing oil rigs, stock tickers, maybe silicon chips, or, I don't know, shipping containers stacked on a massive boat.
That is the standard association. Yeah. Heavy industry, high tech, and fossil fuels.
Exactly. You probably aren't picturing a snail.
No, I doubt many people are visualizing a gastropod when they check their retirement fund.
But today, we are going to completely shatter that image. We've got a stack of research here that is honestly mind-blowing.
It really is.
We are going to find out that the humble mollusk isn't just a squishy creature living in the tide pool. It is a hidden engine of the human economy and has been for 4,000 years.
It's a fascinating journey. We're looking at sources that range from, archaeological studies of Bronze Age cemeteries in the Carpathian Basin to technical fisheries reports from modern India.
Wow.
And the thread connecting them is that humans have an obsession with calcified exoskeletons.
We are talking about jewelry, religion, high-end perfume, which was a total shock to me, and even massive industrial mining operations.
It's the sheer scale of it that surprises most people. We tend to think of shells as, a delicate things, maybe a souvenir from a vacation.
Right.
But as we'll see, they are the raw material for everything from ancient status symbols to the cement holding our buildings together.
So the mission for this deep dive is simple. We are going to trace the hidden economy of the mollusk. We are going to see how a tiny trapdoor on a sea snail becomes a global luxury commodity, and how shells were the original bling 4,000 years before hip-hop culture. And I promise you, by the end of this, you will never look at a sea snail the same way again.
Especially when you find out about the trapdoor. That is a highlight.
But let's start at the beginning, let's rewind about 4,000 years. We have this deep archaeological study on the Maros culture.
Right.
This is the Bronze Age, right around the 21st to 19th century BC. Geographically, we're looking at the southern Carpathian Basin, which is, modern-day Serbia and Romania?
That's right, the Maros culture. And to set the stage, this is a society where we see social stratification really starting to become visible. You have the haves and the have-nots.
Okay.
It's a time when people started needing ways to signal their importance.
And how do you show you're a VIP in 2000 BC?
You wear wealth. But in this specific context, wealth isn't just gold. It's shells.
Shells.
The sources describe specifically dentalium shells and columbella shells as major indicators of status.
Can you describe those for us? Because when I hear shell, I picture a clam or a scallop.
Dentalium are fascinating little things. They're scaphopods, often called tusk or tooth shells.
Husk shells.
Yeah, imagine a tiny curved tube like a miniature elephant tusk that's naturally hollow and open at both ends.
So they are basically nature's pre-made beads.
Exactly. You don't even have to drill them. They're perfect for stringing right out of the ocean.
And the other one?
Then you have columbella, which are small sea snails, spiraled and very durable.
And the key here, which this study really emphasizes, is that the Maros people lived inland. They weren't near the ocean.
Correct. These are marine shells found in graves in the Carpathian Basin. That implies a complex trade network existed across Europe over 4,000 years ago.
Right.
If you were wearing these, you weren't just wearing a pretty object. You were wearing distance. You were showing everyone that you had connections to a world hundreds of kilometers away.
Let's get into the CSI part of this, because the specific grave findings mentioned in the source material are wild. The archaeologists didn't just say, oh, look, shells.
No, they didn't.
They analyzed exactly how they were worn. Grave number 246 at the Makran necropolis. That one really stood out to me.
Yes. Grave 246. This was a female skeleton. She was buried with a head ornament.
A head ornament.
Yeah, think of it like an elaborate headband or a tiara made of 16 columbella beads, plus a necklace of dentalium tubes. She would have been visually striking.
But Grave 104 takes it to another level. This is the one that screams power.
Grave 104 is a prime example of conspicuous consumption. This individual had a massive belt containing 73 columbella shells.
73.
Just imagine the physics of that. A belt made of 73 sea snails. It would be heavy. It would be bulky.
And the sound.
And think about the sound. It would rattle.
It would rattle, yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
It wasn't subtle. When she walked, she made noise. She commanded attention acoustically as well as visually.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The archaeologists looked at these shells under microscopes, and they found something that changes how we view these people.
This is the forensic detail that brings history to life.
Yeah.
They examined the perforations, the holes drilled into the shells to string them. They found that the holes were heavily worn and deformed, often oval-shaped rather than round.
So what does that tell us?
It tells us that this wasn't a funeral costume, this wasn't a cheap suit bought for the burial or a prop. These people wore these ornaments every single day while they were alive. The strings had rubbed against the shell for years, maybe decades, wearing the holes into irregular shapes through friction.
It was their daily identity. It was like wearing a wedding ring or a favorite watch that you never take off.
Precisely. And it wasn't just for adults. They found a young girl engraved 247 with a necklace of dentalium tubes.
A child.
And since a child wouldn't have had time to wear down the shells that much herself, it suggests these were heirlooms.
Hand-me-downs.
Cherished possessions passed down from mother to daughter. So 4,000 years ago, a sea snail shell was a family treasure, holding generational wealth and memory.
It really makes you realize that the concept of a status symbol is just, it's hardwired into us. We just swapped snail shells for diamonds.
Effectively, yes.
Okay, so you've got Bronze Age bling, but I want to pivot geographically and spiritually. We're moving from the inland cemeteries of ancient Europe to the coasts of India.
Right.
The sources here describe a totally different relationship with mollusks.
Yes. In the Indian context, specifically looking at the reports from the Central Marine Fisheries Research Institute, shells take on a divine quality. We have to talk about the sacred Chank, or Xanthus pyrum.
This is that heavy, white, porcelain-looking shell, right?
Yeah.
The one you often see in Hindu iconography being held by deities.
That's the one. It's massive, heavy, and extremely thick. They are fished up by divers, historically, in the Gulf of Mannar, and used to make bangles. But there is a specific biological quirk that makes one of these shells priceless.
The spiral.
The spiral. Most gastropods are dextral, meaning if you hold them with the top up, the opening is on the right. They spiral clockwise. It's just how their genetics usually work.
Okay.
But very, very rarely you find a sinistral Chank.
A lefty.
A lefty. It spirals counterclockwise. In the source material, it's explicitly stated that a sinistral Chank is considered a divine symbol of success, prosperity, and peace. It is technically valued at its weight in gold.
That is a literal fortune for a calcium carbonate accident.
It's a beautiful example of how biology meets belief. But the sources also mention a shell that had a very practical use in architecture. The window pane oyster.
Placenta. I love that scientific name. But wait, windows? Before glass?
Before glass was cheap and universally available, yes. These oysters have very flat, round, translucent shells. In places like Goa and also in the Philippines and China, these were trimmed and used to glaze windows and shutters.
What kind of light does that let in?
It's pearlescent. It filters the harsh tropical sun into a soft, diffused glow. Imagine living inside a house literally shielded by oysters.
It's kind of poetic.
It is, yeah.
And if you got sick, you might eat the pearls.
Well, that's the other fascinating part. The source mentions that the pearls from the window pane oyster aren't the hard gem quality ones we use for jewelry. They're soft.
Soft pearls.
So they are used in medicine. There's an Ayurvedic preparation called muktik bhasma mentioned in the text.
So, shells for status, shells for windows, and pearls for medicine. But we need to jump to the modern era now, because this is where the hidden economy part really surprised me. We're going to Kollam in Kerala.
Right. This is a fascinating economic case study of a major landing center for gastropods.
And the story here is a shift in value. It used to be that fishermen were catching shrimp, and these sea snails, specifically whelks, were just annoying bycatch. They'd throw them back or maybe eat the meat locally.
But then the market shifted. The sources indicate that now boats are going out targeting these snails. It's no longer an accident. It's a specific industry.
And here is the twist. They sell the meat, sure. They sell the shell for craft. But the most valuable part of the snail is the door.
The operculum.
Okay, break this down for us. What is an operculum?
If you imagine a snail retreating into its shell, it needs a way to seal the opening to protect itself from predators or from drying out.
Makes sense.
It has a hard, horny plate attached to its foot. When it pulls in, that plate plugs the hole. That's the operculum. It's effectively a biological trapdoor.
And apparently this little trapdoor is gold.
It is surprisingly lucrative. The source from 2017 notes that while the meat is exported, the dried operculum is in huge demand, particularly in China and Japan.
For what?
Perfume and incense. It's used as a scent fixative.
A scent fixative.
Think about high-quality incense or perfume. It's made of volatile oils that smell great but evaporate quickly. You need a base note, something heavy and complex, to anchor those oils so the scent lasts.
I see.
Historically, things like ambergris from whales or musk were used, but the operculum of certain gastropods, like the Babylonia species, is excellent for this.
I just want the listener to sit with that for a second. That expensive, smoky incense burning in a temple, or that high-end perfume you put on for a date, might owe its lasting power to the trapdoor of a sea snail from India.
It's a bizarre connection, isn't it? And the price reflects that utility. The source lists prices ranging from $7 up to $44 per kilogram.
$44 a kilo.
For a fisherman in Column, collecting a bag of these little discs represents a significant payday. It turns a piece of biological waste into a high-value export.
It really connects the local fishermen to the global luxury market in a way you just wouldn't expect. But we aren't just talking about artisanal fishing here. We need to talk about scale. Because one of our sources describes an operation that, frankly, I struggle to visualize.
You're referring to the shell mining in Pulaket Lake.
Mining, not fishing, mining.
Correct. This is where we move from biological resource to mineral resource. Pulaket Lake has massive deposits of what they call subfossil shells.
Subfossil.
These are ancient beds of shells, mostly bivalves that have been buried in the mud and silt over centuries. They aren't alive. They are just massive layers of calcium carbonate sitting under the lake bed.
And they are digging them up on an industrial scale. The numbers in this report are staggering.
They are. The report estimates that between 1,650 and 2,940 tons of shells are mined every single month.
Nearly 3,000 tons a month.
That's roughly 30,000 tons a year. And it's a labor-intensive operation. You have about 70 boats going out daily, with 5 to 7 people per boat. They are manually dredging up the lake bed to get these old shells.
And these aren't for necklaces, they aren't for windows. What happens to 30,000 tons of dead shell?
They get burned.
Burned.
They are raw calcium carbonate. When you burn them in a kiln, you get lime. And this industrial lime is the backbone of the local economy. It's used to manufacture calcium carbide. It's a key ingredient in cement. It's used in fertilizers and even to treat industrial effluents.
Wait, I saw something about chickens, too.
Yes, poultry feed. Chickens need calcium to produce hard eggshells. So the crushed lime from these ancient shells is mixed into feed.
So if you live in that region, the walls of your house, the cement, and the egg you eat for breakfast are all connected to these ancient shell deposits from the bottom of a lake.
Exactly. It's a massive extraction industry based entirely on the leftovers of mollusk populations from the past. It's the recycling of history into modern infrastructure.
It's incredible. But we have to talk about the dark side, too. Not all mollusks are profitable friends or ancient resources. Some are absolute destroyers.
We can't ignore the borers.
The shipworms.
Teredo and Bankia. These are mollusks that have evolved to drill into wood. If you are a maritime culture, these are your worst nightmare.
They look like worms, but they are technically clams, right?
Yes, bivalves with a very modified shell that acts like a drill bit. They bore into submerged timber piers, ship hulls, pilings. Historically, they have caused massive economic damage, sinking ships and collapsing docks.
The flip side of the coin.
The mollusk as an economic liability.
And there is also the cost of us exploiting them. The sources touched on conservation, and it sounds like we might be pushing our luck.
We are, especially regarding the whelk fishery in Column. When you shift from bycatch to targeted fishing, you start seeing signs of overexploitation. The sources mention the destruction of egg capsules and the harvesting of juveniles.
Even with something that reproduces as fast as a snail, you can still wipe them out if you don't let them grow up.
Absolutely. And with the mining in Pulaket, it's even more stark. You are extracting a non-renewable resource. Those subfossil beds took centuries, maybe millennia, to form.
Right.
Once they are dug up for cement, they are gone.
It's a lot to process. We've gone from a Bronze Age woman wearing built of sea snails to show her status, to a modern fisherman selling snail trapdoors for perfume, to massive barges mining tons of ancient shells for cement.
It shows that our relationship with the natural world is incredibly complex. We don't just coexist. We utilize every single part. We are relentless optimizers of our environment.
So what does this all mean? When you look at all these papers together, what's the big takeaway?
You know, what strikes me is this. We often view nature as fragile or purely biological, something to be admired in a documentary.
Right.
But the history of the mollusk shows that for thousands of years, humans have viewed nature primarily as inventory.
Inventory.
Yes, parts to be worn, traded, burned for lime, or eaten. And it leaves me with a final, slightly provocative thought.
Yeah.
Those Bronze Age graves, We know about their culture, their trade routes, and their social hierarchy, specifically because they buried their dead with shells. They left a record.
Right. The shells tell the story.
But today, in places like Pulicat, we are mining 30,000 tons of that record every year and burning it into cement. We are taking the biological history of the lake and turning it into temporary infrastructure. As we mechanize this harvest, are we effectively erasing the archaeological record of the future?
That is a heavy thought. We are burning the history book before it can even be written.
In a very literal sense, yes. We are consuming the past to build the present.
Well, on that note, next time you pick up a shell on the beach, remember, you're holding a potential gemstone, a window pane, a perfume ingredient, or a bag of cement.
In a history lesson.
Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.
A pleasure.
See you next time.